I've just seen the second episode of the second season of Star Trek Lower Decks called Kayshon, His Eyes Open, at least I think, and it was a very pleasant surprise. I hated episode 1. So when I got the chance to watch episode 2, I was pleasantly surprised. The Lower Decks team gets a new temp replacement for Boimler, Jet. He's the tough black guy we have seen in season 1, where he was one of the few likable characters. And he might be the best thing about this episode, because he's finally the guy who puts Mariner in her place. That's always a great thing to witness. So in the A-plot, these two characters basically fight for the leadership of the team, and the resolution of this conflict was a very, and I mean very, pleasant surprise. It was actually a very Star Trek moment, a very human moment. And there are so few of them in these new shows that we actually have to cherish them. So our team is helping with the cleanup of a dead guy's locker room. Yes, I actually agree with Mariner this time. This is basically what they're doing. A collector has died and they're bringing his things to a different collector's ship. I would ask why this is a Starfleet task, but it would mean that I care. So the second collector, who looks like a rejected Futurama alien, secretly steals Kahless's sex helmet. Don't ask, it would be even more embarrassing. And they accidentally activate the security system, so the ship is now basically trying to kill them. This is the best time to talk about a thing which I'd like to call nostalgia porn, or a more polite version, Easter egg hunting. I know there are people who love references, and they even try to find all of them. Well, I'm not one of these people. I'm actually quite the opposite. Every single time I see or hear a reference to a previous, better Star Trek show, I don't get happy, I get distracted, because it completely ruins the story for me. It literally drags me out of the story and reminds me that I should be watching something much better. And sometimes it even annoys me. For example, in the beginning, the captain tells us that one collector wanted to collect data a few years ago. That is, of course, a reference to an episode from Star Trek The Next Generation called The Most Toys. What this reference does is that it breaks any of my concentration, and I don't really watch the episode anymore. I'm instead thinking about returning to Star Trek The Next Generation. I mean, it's been a whole year since I made my last video about it. Geez, I really need to get back as soon as possible. See, a reference like this distracted me even now as I'm writing the script, and the Bear Doctor response actually annoys me. He says that they should all let data be because he just wants to feel things, and he behaves like a 10-year-old girl on a Justin Bieber concert. Is Justin Bieber actually still a thing, now that I think about it? A reference like this annoys me because I don't know what the writer intended. Does the writer have the brain of a 10-year-old girl? Or does he, I think Chris Kula is a male name, does he think that we, the audience, have the brains of a 10-year-old? Is he trying to insult us because he thinks that that's how we react when we see these references? I'm so used to being made fun of for liking Star Trek, especially during the last couple of years, that I honestly don't know if that was meant to be funny or insulting or both. Anyway, what I was trying to say is that I'm pretty sure that there will be, or already are, dozens of YouTube videos with a clickbait title Something like 25 things you missed in this episode, and the thumbnail will be a frame of this episode with a red arrow and a yellow circle, and we'll start with a minute-long sponsored segment. I just wanted to tell you that this is not one of those channels. I don't care. What I do care about in this episode, however, was the previously mentioned solution of their escape. Jet and Mariner couldn't agree on which plan to use because the second collector got killed by the ship, so they asked Rutherford and Tandy to come up with a plan, and they do. And their plan brings them to safety to the Cerritos. Wow, I wouldn't think that somebody showing to Mariner that she's not the center of the universe will make me happy, but it did. Especially when she learned that the other members of the team might have valuable ideas too. Great, this part of the story felt like Star Trek. So, who was that Kayshon mentioned in the title? The new security officer on the Cerritos. He's a member of the race we have seen in Darmok. He's a pretty funny character because he still speaks in metaphors sometimes, but I didn't mention him because the ship's security system turns him into a doll, and we don't see his humanoid form until the end. So, I really liked the A-plot. What about the B-plot? Well, it's a completely different story. I mean, the B-plot could be a separate episode, and it probably should have been. It's about Boimler serving on the Titan. The Titan is, of course, commanded by William Riker, but as I said in my previous video, he's not the man we used to know and love, but a buffoon. For this episode, however, they toned it down. I mean, it still feels like a parody of Riker and not Riker himself, but he's much more tolerable, I guess. And in one moment he feels like the real Riker, but I'll get there in a minute. The Titan is on a secret mission fighting the Pecklets. Why did I decide to use the Pecklets again? In the case you haven't seen my videos about Season 1 or The Next Generation, I'm not a fan of this race. The reason is very simple. They feel like the writers and producers intentionally make fun of mentally ill people. I wanted to use the word beginning with an R, but even though it's a medical term, I've been told it's offensive, and YouTube likes to demonetize too many usage of offensive words, so let's just say they are slow. And it really feels like the people behind these episodes think that it's hilarious to make fun of this type of people. Now, of course, they are the creators, and as creators they have the right to make fun of anybody they want, just like I, as a consumer, have the right to say I don't like it. I also make lots of offensive jokes, but I personally would never make fun of somebody's health issues, whether it's mental health or physical health. Anyway, the away team is trapped and Boimler has to save them. I don't want to go into many technical details, let's just say that they replicate Tom Riker. In the case you don't know what I'm talking about, a few years back Will Riker got duplicated during a transporter accident. One Riker, called Will, got beamed back on his ship, but a different version of him stayed on the planet until he was found years later, and he started to use the name Tom. So now Boimler beams his colleagues back to the ship, but when they try to beam him up, they have the same type of accident. They beam one Boimler to the ship, and a few minutes later, a second Boimler arrives in a shuttle. So what now? Well, these two episodes have established that Brad Boimler loved being on the Titan and in all of that action, but he also likes the boring, quiet lifestyle he had on the Cerritos. So now he literally can be on both places at the same time. One Boimler will stay on the Titan, the other one returns back to the Cerritos, and they have a nice little talk with Riker. And I don't know if I understood it correctly, but am I imagining things? Boimler says that despite the fact that he loves action, he would love to serve on the Enterprise D, where they had daycare centers and string quartets. Everybody from the team in the end agrees. And when he has the same talk with Riker, even he agrees that he misses life on the D. And there is something in Jonathan Frakes' voice which makes it sound real and honest. Like we are not listening to the parody of Riker or the real Riker, but for a moment it sounds like we're listening to Jonathan Frakes. So did the writer actually call out Alex Kurtzman? Did he just publicly say that The Next Generation was much better than the new action-packed shows, and Frakes agreed? Or am I just thinking too much about it? And in the final moment, one Boimler returns to the Cerritos, and Mariner is a bitch to him. So she physically assaults him in front of other officers, and instead of getting arrested and court-martialed, she gets no punishment and demands a drink from him. So all of her character development from this episode was flushed down the toilet in the final scene. Wow. On my standard scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is absolute garbage, 10 is a masterpiece, and 5 is just average, I would give this episode 7 out of 10. Definitely above the very low standard of Lower Decks, but not really a masterpiece. I have realized one thing during the second watching of this episode. I would really, really love to see a live-action show about the USS Titan. I heard that the novels are pretty good, so if they made it correctly and hired some decent writers, the show could be a hit, but on the other hand, they would probably turn it into a second Picard show, and they would force Riker to go around and apologize for being a man or something equally stupid. Anyway, this episode was definitely a step into the right direction, less references for me, and more character development is what I would prefer. The humor was decent except for the Packlet parts. I actually laughed a few times, which is pretty unusual for this comedy show. Let's hope the third episode continues with this trend. I really don't know when I will be able to put this video online, but the third episode will be released tomorrow, meaning the day after I'm writing the script, so I hope it will be good. Thank you very much for watching and listening to me, and see you all hopefully very soon. Bye.